Microsoft 365 Copilot keeps getting better and better, but alongside those improvements, we keep seeing changes to how exactly you use Copilot or access its features in the different services and apps where it's presented. Right the way up to the last week, we've seen this message center message that's telling us that yet again, we're going to see a change in entry point to Copilot in Word. So in this video, amidst all these changes, I wanted to just give you a bit of an update on two slightly different ways that I've started to talk about how to use Copilot in my end user adoption sessions, to focus more in the intent of how a user might think about using Copilot versus the strict, this is where you go to use it, these are the capabilities, things that keep changing around as the product improves. So stick with me and I'll give you a bit of an insight into these two changes that I've recently started making. My name is Nick DeCourcy. I'm a Microsoft 365 consultant who specialises in AI adoption for small and medium-sized businesses. I'm also a Microsoft MVP for Microsoft 365 Copilot. If you're interested in keeping up with AI advancements, make sure you get subscribed to the channel and drop this video a like so you get to see more from me in the future. And if you're interested in working with me, check out the links down in the video description to get in contact. So the real best practice around how you describe using Copilot to engage users with it is really around this idea of a narrative approach in terms of what it is you're trying to do with it, how it's going to impact the workday, so to speak. But a question that comes up again and again when I'm talking with those who have started using it or are wanting to engage with Copilot more comes back to the question of, well, what should I write in a prompt? And you know, back in the early days of Copilot, and I think this slide here that you can see is still part of the adoption materials, we really thought about how do you create the perfect prompt. You know, we were talking about the idea that everyone needs to be a prompt engineer, and that's going to be the job of the future. And I don't think many people are talking so highly about prompt engineering anymore. And while this is still really useful, I actually think that saying that you need to learn how to prompt Copilot creates a hurdle that is unnecessary with the technology that we have now, with these longer context windows and just smarter models. And so I've moved away from really thinking about how do I create the perfect prompt to considering how do I have the best conversation. And in my mind, a conversation with Copilot should have three components. We should be thinking about establishing context in exactly the same way we would with a colleague. Say you want a conversation with a colleague about the vendor meeting that you had last Thursday. Well, the first thing you need to do is to work out, was that person in the meeting, or have they at least looked at the content related to it? It's going to be a pretty short conversation if the answer is no. So we establish that context, whether it's through directing Copilot to a specific file or a specific meeting or a specific email, or whether it's more general, saying look for some information on this project, or look for some information on this particular topic on the web. Whatever you do to establish it, and whether you do it in one turn or whether you do it in 5 turns, it doesn't matter, but you need to pull that context into the conversation so that you know that Copilot is thinking about the range of topics that you want to actually have a chat about. And once you've established that context, what we're then going to think about is how are you going to leverage Copilot's intelligence? Again, in exactly the same way you might be thinking about working with a colleague. You know, like you're not going to go and chat with someone just for the sake of it. There's some output that you're trying to get. So, you know, you're the person who's actually going to be onboarding this vendor. I want to get your input on it in terms of, you know, dates or timeline or something like that. Or you're the risk specialist and I want to make sure this insurance certificate they've provided looks a bit odd. Like, is there something that we're missing here? So these kinds of concerns. So you're going to work with Copilot to generate some of that kind of understanding or intelligence. And only once we've done that, once we've got the right context and we've got the right insights, are we going to think about, well, what's the output that we're trying to get? And it may be that you step away from your chat and you just need to go to a meeting and you're using Copilot to help you generate some thoughts about that meeting. Or you might want an email, you might want a spreadsheet, you might want a Word document, you might want to create a Copilot page. It doesn't matter. but you just need to embed this flow of, let's not create the hurdle of I have to create the perfect prompt. Let's think about, let's have the most valuable conversation, and think about this in the same terms that we would think about working with a colleague. And that can be a really useful way of breaking down, well, wherever I'm starting, that's going to be really relevant to whatever entry point it is that I'm taking with Copilot. And then beyond that, even if we are thinking about that kind of narrative approach of how does Copilot fit into my day? How does using Copilot look different if you're kind of someone who's an assistant in the finance office to if you're a marketing director? That's really valuable. We need to do that. We need to build that understanding. But we still have to have the point of, where does the rubber hit the road? And how do I actually do it? And that is the thing that is most significantly negatively impacted, I would say, by the fact that the UI keeps changing, and the kind of baseline UX of how do I enter doing whatever it is with Copilot keeps moving around. And that's not going to change. I mean, Microsoft is learning what works and what doesn't work. They're building that into the product in real time. Each of us will have different opinions on that, but it is the reality of the product that we've got today. And so we have to work with that, and we have to build out an approach to adoption and an approach to end user engagement when it comes to that tool adoption, with that in mind, because there is no point in framing this in the same way that we might a CRM system or a finance system, where we simply go through the rote of, well, if you enter this information here and you press these buttons, this is the result you're going to get. Because frankly, that's never going to be the case with Copilot, because as a probabilistic system, it's going to work differently than those deterministic systems. But also, it doesn't work with the way that Copilot is being developed right now, and so we need to be considerate of that. So I've moved away from thinking too much about the detailed specifics as a starting point. And the starting point that I want to have for those end users is thinking about the three-legged stool of what actually sits underneath Copilot as a whole. Now, the first one is, if we jump into chat here, you can see that we have Copilot Chat, and that's really the center of what we can do with Copilot, particularly thinking about having those valuable conversations. But the big change in recent times is that we have pretty much exactly the same chat experience in all the main apps as well. And that's logical, but it's not always been the case. There have been differences there. So we can bring that chat now in exactly the same way, from whether we're using the Microsoft 365 Copilot app, or whether we're using Word, or whether we're using PowerPoint. We can bring those chats into the same place. So the first leg of that stool is really that chat experience, that building context, that having valuable conversations. So then we move over to, well, we have the chat-based product. We also have a contextual product. So there are certain things that you might want to do in PowerPoint that you're only ever going to do in PowerPoint. And it's not relevant to create a slide in Outlook because that capability doesn't exist. So we still have that point of the rubber has to hit the road and we have to do something with Copilot. So at that point, we're thinking about the contextual capabilities of the different apps that we're in. And so this may, we've had the announcement about Word and how the entry point to Word is going to change. I have no doubt that the likelihood is that this stuff we're seeing here is going to move over here and be in agent mode. And if we move over to Word and take a look at that, you can see, let's get rid of that there, and we'll look at the contextual capabilities that we have in Copilot in Word. And we know now that those contextual capabilities are, I think, going to be moving over to a chat-based kind of using agent mode here. Well, so long as you know that Copilot can help you with those things, it doesn't really matter. You can seek out and you could quickly learn where you do something from, or you could try out different ways in different apps, look out for a Copilot button or look out for an agent mode button and understand those different capabilities. But if you're thinking about it from the point of view of there's a specific button that I need to press to do X, X or to do Y, then it's going to be a lot harder to make that transition mentally than if you kind of understand this principle of, well, we have chat and then we have these in-context capabilities. Then if we go beyond that and we jump back over to something like forms, for example, we kind of have the third leg of the stool in that we have these very kind of purpose-driven capabilities. Like in forms, we don't see the same picture of Copilot as we do elsewhere. You don't have that kind of chat experience in the same way here. You just have a capability of, I want to create a form, Copilot, can you help me? Your similar standard exists if you go into the Create tab in the Microsoft 365 Copilot app. These are all capabilities where Copilot's going to help you, but they aren't the same as using in the app. So you have those, you have the chat capability, you have the contextual capability, and then you have those kind of purpose-driven Copilots. And so long as you're aware that whatever you're doing with Copilot in any app, it's going to fall into one of those buckets of activity, and you understand what those different buckets of activity look like, then making that transition from the kind of narrative, what does my day look like with Copilot, how's it going to impact this role differently than that role, down to the nitty-gritty of how do I actually do that. Making that transition is going to be a lot more straightforward, a lot easier, and a lot more resilient to these UI and UX changes than simply teaching people this is the button that you're going to press in Word, because as soon as they see a different version of that app, or as soon as there's an update, that understanding is going to break, and then they're going to be searching around wondering how they use Copilot. So that's all I really wanted to share today. Hopefully that's been useful to you. I'd be really interested to learn, how are you approaching training when it comes to these kinds of changes with Copilot in your organisation? So start that conversation down in the comments and let me know that. Thanks for watching through to the end. Hopefully this was useful. Until the next video, bye bye.